First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and check all the radio gear and talk about it for a second. Per the customer request, I know that the customer going to be receiving this airplane is using one of the new Optic 6s to going to use that to run his airplane. I'm using my own Optic 6 to go ahead and set it up that way. It's going to be identical when he gets his. There's going to be no problems in the way it's programmed. Couple of the reasons I get everything and try it out before it goes in the airplane, I want to make sure at first it works and then everything is centered before I go ahead and stick it in. As far as the equipment goes, a standard Hi-Tech Supreme receiver is pretty much the receiver I use for almost every application. Occasionally we'll use a 555 in a small airplane if I need it, but these Supremes are bulletproof and relatively inexpensive. I use Hi-Tech gear for most all of my planes because a couple reasons: easy to get, cheap, it's tough as nails, and it works. It's reliable stuff. So standard Hi-Tech switch. When it comes to the batteries, I don't use the Hi-Tech battery. I'm always after a little bit more capacity, and in this case I'm using a 1650 nickel metal hydride. The standard 700 milliamp packs are fine, but in this airplane I'm going to be adding nose weight no matter how I configure the gear, so I'm going to use as heavy as a pack as I can to get as much weight forward. Servos, I'm going to use the Hi-Tech 325 HB, the new carbonite geared standard servo. Been using these for close to 2 years now, and have yet to break one, which is, I can't say that for any other servo I've ever used. So let me get this on and powered up and make sure everything works and is centered. Aileron channel 1 on, elevator channel 2 is on and working, glitch free, no issues, no glitches. I like to shake stuff around. It's going to get tossed around in the airplane. At this point, I'm going to check to make sure all the trims are set at 0. I'm also going to get into programming and make sure that my sub trims are set at 0, just to be sure. So channel 1, channel 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, anything I do sub trim wise is set at neutral. So I know when I turn these things off that they are going to be set where they need to be. And go ahead and get everything unplugged and start getting everything buried inside the airplane itself. When it comes to the gear installation, at this point you can pop open the fuselage. It's just held together with double-sided sticky tape. So just basically start at one end, carefully pop it open. Takes a little pressure, but once it begins to go, it'll go pretty easy. These kits are built in what I would call a sandwich configuration. Gear placed inside, and then everything brought together. What I like to do, I'll bury the majority of the gear in one side of the airplane, and then mirror image the holes. I like to bury it around the center line, so that way I'm laterally balancing the airplane as much as possible during the build. Some things are going to be offset. I'll run one servo, like the elevator servo, all on one side of the fuse, but I'll offset weight-wise by running the switch and the battery pack slightly off-centered to begin to counterbalance this a little bit as we go. So at this point, I'm just going to set one of these fuse halves off to the side and lay the gear in place where I know it's going to go. Okay, when I start to place the gear in, some things are factors. In this case, the customer wants to have their receiver removable. That does differ from the way I do a standard build. The majority of the time, I'm going to put my receiver, I'm going to commit the gear to the aircraft for the life of the plane. Some guys don't like that. This guy here, in particular, wants to be able to remove the receiver. So this having a removable wing, the receiver is going to be mounted up inside a pocket inside the wing cavity, and he'll be able to pull it out, and I'll have it out the rear with a antenna tube. So actually placing the gear, I'll start with the battery. I don't like to put the battery all the way to the front. I know that no matter how I configure this airplane, I'm going to have to put nose weight in here. So I want to have some room to put plenty of lead up here if I need to, but also have foam around the lead and then a nice layer of foam cushion in between the battery and the lead. So this being a wide fuse, looking at it, I'm going to go ahead and place the battery upright. That way I still have, a couple inches up front to go with. Next I'm going to put the servo, trying to bring everything that's heavy farther forward. Maybe move the battery pack just down just a bit towards the bottom. I'll put the carbon rod up top. Battery pack's going to be sitting somewhere here. And then receiver is going to go probably right about here. I'm going to have the wing block sitting here, so I'm going to have the receiver just sitting somewhere inside this cavity. And this part here will kind of dictate itself out as the rest of the parts fall in. I know that this is it's a consideration, but it's one of the last steps, so it's not going to be as important. I just have to consider it, where it's going to go a little bit. Next, I'm going to lay out the carbon rods. A couple of the things that I'm going to do is I want to have a straight line for the carbon rod in between the servo arm and the fulcrum point of my elevator connector. What I like to do is I'm going to take the elevator, stick it on here, and then put a mark on the fuselage where that's going to come down, so I know exactly where that's going to be. And I'll just bring this here and put a dot at the point where it's at. So right here, I know this is exactly where my elevator horn is going to hook up to, so that's going to be the point where I do my straight line. Okay, now what I'm going to do is have basically the battery, the servo, and next step is going to be putting the carbon rods in. I can tell that this carbon rod here is pointed in a straight line to the point that I have down there. It'll be in a straight line. I want to get it just a little bit higher on this end where the servo is going to go. When it's where I want, I'm going to put a line right in the foam. Got to get this pin working. And I just put a dot here and a dot here. Take a ruler and just draw a line all the way across. Once I got the line on, I'm going to start with the back end. I always put three pieces of carbon in the fuse. On the 72s, I'll put 4 just because of their mass. If you nose these planes in pretty hard or you dork them in bad, the place they're going to want to break is either right here in front of the wing or right behind the wing. And so this carbon rod has 2 general uses. Obviously it's going to stiffen up and double as a push rod housing, but we're going to double up the carbon rods on the front and rear to just make sure these planes stay together. So in this case, I know I just have to lay this thing. I have the point where I'm going to have to take out to allow for my elevator linkage to work. So I'm going to bring this piece of carbon here pretty well all the way to the back. Just going to put a mark here, and again a mark where it's going to come out up here. And just draw a line. All right. Set this gear back on where it was at. I know it's going to be here. And I'm going to go ahead and just quickly trace around it. Lining the servo up, dead center with the line. Quickly trace around it. Now, when it comes to a servo, I know there are servo templates available that some guys use to trace out their servos. You can use a Dremel or a Rotozip, and you can then hog this out if you want a real precision hole. And I know that you can get those from Sky King Aviation. What I do, I'm just used to doing it the old-fashioned way, I guess, is one way I want to say it. I just use a razor knife, pull it out with some needle nose pliers, and just pull it out. Once I get down close, I pull it out by individual cells and I glue it in place. Hot glue for everything. Now I know, though, where these are going to go. I'm going to go ahead and overlay this third piece of carbon, and I want it to, what you want to do is you want to make sure you're going to have quite a few inches of intersection of carbon so that they are going to lock together. Again, just placing some marks, drawing a line, and I have where these marks were, and I know the length of these carbon tubes. You know, just from laying them out, I could tell where my marks were. So now I have rough lines where I'm going to put all my gear at. Here's the way I do it. When it comes to cutting out the channel, I want to put this right in the center line of the airplane. One way of achieving that pretty easy is to cut a V slot all the way down for the carbon on all three slots. Again, this is what we're going to do. Is we're going to cut out about 3/16 of an inch at a 45-degree angle on each side of the line, and that's going to take us down a total depth of about 1/8 of an inch where it's going to intersect, and that's going to put that carbon rod dead center of the fuselage. So again, putting it in and drawing it back at a 45-degree angle. And just go all the way out to your line to the servo and all the way back past where you know you're going to need to be. And the reason for that is your push rod's going to be going through there and you need it to clear. So you got it, out it comes. It's going to sit nice and it's going to go approximately halfway down. That's the goal. We're going to do that to all of them here. Now, inside this fuse doesn't need to be super pretty. We're going to close it up. It's not going to be seen. We need it to be tight and functional more than pretty. So if your line's a little wavy and you get a little bit, you know, miscut, as long as everything fits, it's not crooked, it doesn't bind, it really doesn't matter. It needs to be tight, strong, and work. Nothing really more than that. So don't worry about spending a lot of time here inside the fuse making everything look perfect. You know, spend your time on the outside finishing your airplane and covering it. Do something that'll actually affect the flight performance. In here won't do a thing. So, okay, I've got that done. And I know those carbon rods are going to drop right down in there. Now what I do is I just plunge this down in to where the servos are going to be. And I know about the, you know, I want to go down just a little past the actual depth of the servo. And then pull it out with a set of pliers. Now this part here, you want to be extremely gentle. Don't want to be over anxious or anything. So as you can see, this is like brain surgery. One false move and it's all done. So that's not too sarcastic now, is it? All right. Okay, now once I get down in here, I know I'm getting close. Then what I do, I just take the front end of the pliers and just kind of go back and forth to knock the loose foam out. And then take my servo. I've got to make a quick slot for the lead in. And all I do there is just cut a small little notch for it to slide right into. Then I'm just going to test fit it. I want it to sit just about, well, just past flush. Actually, it's dead on where I want it to go right now. I pretty much just want to be able to fill a lip. The reason I go that far down in, I just know from experience, I want to use the second horn on one of the high-tech control horns that I use, and the second horn will be dead center line if I go just past center depth. You can see here that I need to open this up to fit the control horn a little more, and it's just doing that. Just kind of take it, pull it out, get rid of it, and go on. The battery pack, I want to cut this down to just before half. The reason is this servo here, obviously if this servo is buried 100% on the left side of the fuselage, I want to bring a little bit more weight towards the right, counterbalance it. Also the switch is going to sit entirely on the right hand side of the airplane. I don't know if it makes a whole lot of difference. I just do it every time because I like the fact that, at least in my mind, the plane's a little bit more laterally balanced. So I'm going to go ahead and cut down to about the depth I know. And again, be extremely gentle when you pull this out. You don't want to hurt anything. Heaven forbid you tear some foam. Just fit this thing in here, and it's really close. I don't know if you could see in the camera or not, but it's just, you could see where the apex of the cell comes over, and well, here, I'll just put a mark on it. And that mark is just at half. So that I know that if the pen was sitting up, I'm just over on the side of it. So I'm good to go here. Don't want to delay. We'll take the battery pack, little hot glue. Everything on the fuselage I put together with hot glue. I will use goop in one small area, but 99% of everything is just hot glued. Stick it in, it's set. I know that at this point this servo here is centered. I'm going to go ahead and change the control horn. I'm going to plug it back in to make sure it's centered again after that, but we'll go from there. Now we're going to go ahead and get this servo horn back on. I'm just double checking to make sure that it's centered. I don't want to put it in if it's not. So just plugging everything back in. Turn on the transmitter. Turn on the switch. Perfect. It's going to go in here. I want this to be at about 90 degrees. On it goes. And get it screwed back in place. And also, before I start gluing everything up, I just want to hold it in place, make sure it moves very freely. There's no binding, there's no foam around it to catch. So I'm safe. Yeah, I have it plugged in the aileron hole, but it doesn't matter, it's all centered. So it doesn't make a difference either way. So now we're, what I like to do on the servo, I like to wipe it down with a little acetone or alcohol. Take some of the mold release off, and what works really well for those are alcohol prep pads. You can get these at any drugstore. You can get them for like $200 for a couple dollars. So They're really inexpensive. They're great because as soon as you wipe it off, you take off that mold release and throw them away, and you don't have to worry about it. So just kind of clean them off, let it sit out there and air dry for a second, and I'm just going to pull out a couple more cells here so everything sits real nice and tight, and glue her in place. It's about dry. That's perfect. When we get this going, go ahead and just drop in the hot glue all around the edge. I put a pretty good amount on the back side. You don't want obviously the servo to come loose after a hard landing. So I drop a fairly decent amount in there. Once it's in, I make sure that whatever squishes out isn't going to touch the control horn. If you can see, I've actually made a fairly large cavity to make sure that nothing in here is going to touch at all. And actually what I'll even do is take a little bit more out here, so that way as that horn travels all the way over, there's no possibility it's going to ever bind on anything in there. Once it's down in, I take the gun, just like I did on the spars, and I'm going to fill it up with a little bit of extra glue. That's good right there. And I think stuff's going to come flying my way. Good enough. Extra glue. So what do I do at this point also? I like to take a little scrap piece of foam. Don't want to tear that all apart. And I like to just put, because this is down about a 1/16 of an inch or so, I like to put just a small sliver of foam in there to make it level. So when those two halves come together, it's a solid piece. There's no way for that servo to give ever. So I just like to take a little sliver here, and I'm just going to glue it in place. That's about right. Go ahead and get it down in there. And also, if this is just a little bit high, after it's down in there, you can take your razor knife, shave it down. But now, when these two halves marry back up together, the other side of this fuselage is going to lock this in place, and it's not going to allow it to move. You don't have to put any more glue in here. It's solid. It's not going to go anywhere. The next thing I do, I just take a scrap piece of trailing edge stock. You know, I've got plenty of it around. It's a good idea to get something that is dead on straight. I use this to make sure as I begin to lay in my carbon fiber rods that I'm going to glue in my fuselage perfectly, or when I glue the fuselage, it's going to be perfectly square and straight. If you were to take the carbon fiber and somehow get a bow or bend in it and bend this fuselage up a little bit, you could, you know, theoretically put everything in a little bit crooked, have a banana-shaped fuse. What I do to eliminate that is, like I said, I just have this piece of scrap straight wood, and I'm going to tack it on a couple spots on this fuse to make sure, I mean, you could see here just the fuse bending down. I'm going to tack it on a few spots just to make sure it holds exactly straight until I drop those carbon rods in. Once they're in, just snap it right back off. I'm only going to put like 3 or 4 dots of glue on this, and it works perfect doing it that way. And just pull them up into place. And the hot glue only takes a second to set up. And now, when this is on, I'm just going to eyeball the fuse to look straight down the fuse, and you can see it's just perfect. So these are set. I'm going to go ahead and start dropping my rods in. All right, that's dropped in halfway now. And All it is, taking the hot glue, running a channel or bead right down it, and popping it in. I like to give it a quarter turn once I get it started, and that locks it in place. I'm going to use hot glue and goop as I put the fuse house together just on the carbon rods to make sure that I fill up any of the gap, to make sure there's a tight bond inside. I only use the goop to fill up a couple gaps, and I'll use hot glue all the way around the outside edges. So next one is the main one. When you do this, you can see here, I've still got the mark where my elevator linkage is going to come down, and I see exactly where my servo horn is. I want to center this carbon rod pretty much right in between them, and the reason for that, I don't want it too close to the actual fulcrum point of the joint, because I want to have my push rod able to bend a little bit so there's no binding as that shifts positions. So once I have that in place, wherever I set my pin there, and I've got them just about set. Well, I had them just about set. Now I've got them just about set. Where I want them to go, I'm going to put a mark so I can place that carbon rod right back in the same spot. I'm going to leave the glue about a quarter inch or so shy of the mark. That way I don't have a chance of any spilling over into the channel where the push rod's going to run. I like to put it on here in kind of a wavy motion to make sure I get more surface area touched. Set it in place, give it a little quarter turn, and we're set. It's in place. Carbon fiber for the rear. Get it stuck down in here. Same thing. Little quarter turn. Hold it in tight. It's done. Carbon rods are in place. This pops off. Live another day. Right now, the basic gear install is done because of the way this is going to be configured with the removable receiver. I'm going to figure out where that's going to go right now. I've got the wing mounting blocks that the wing bolts are going to go into. I'm going to kind of get an idea where these are going to set. In the actual wing saddle, they're going to sit at the front and back of it. And on the side here, it's really clear where they are. I set them up so they're at an angle, matching the contour of the airfoil. I set them up right at the front and back. So here, all I'm going to do is just trace around it, and that way I have a mark to go off of. Same thing here in the rear. So here we go. This one in the rear, just as the way it looks, I'm going to go ahead and move this up about 1/8 of an inch. Knowing the trailing edge that we're dealing with on the wing already, I'm just going to go into a little bit thicker part of the trailing edge where the bolt's going to go through. Give it a little bit more meat. So from here, I'm going to take the fuse and begin to line up everything and start to cut the rest of the channels out. The way I do that is I put the fuse halves just kind of roughly together so I can look down and eyeball it down. What I do is I just put a mark where the battery is, front to back, also where the servo, where I'm going to put the channel for the servo arm to move in, front to back, and then also I just put a longer line every time to know that's where I need to go front to back for my carbon fiber rod. So I do it that way. I'm just going to eyeball it down the front, kind of the same thing. At this point though, I'm going to take the pin, and I like to just take the pin and put a mark on the inside for my battery, roughly where it's going to go, and then I'll measure for the servo arm because it's a lot easier just to measure that one out. So go ahead and cut these out. I know that I'm square, or going to be square, for the battery. Remember, foam is your friend. Unless it's in your way, then get rid of it, because then it's not. And again, none of this stuff in here is going to be seen, so just get it out of there. Don't go overboard, just go to the depth you need to go. But, you know, don't worry about it. Just get it gone. Okay, for the servo arm, I just use anything to take a rough measurement of how far I got to go up. So, just using my finger with the knife blade, going up so far from the bottom. And then I'm just going to line that up with the mark I've got up here. So, I'm just going to take this area out here to make sure that this arm is going to be free. Doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be free and functional. No binding. Binding is bad. So that'll clear that now. Next thing I'm going to do, I use the ruler, and I'm going to just kind of go down. I've got my marks, my long marks for my top one, top piece of carbon fiber. I just take a quick measurement, how far to the center I am on the front, how far to the center I am on the back. I transfer those onto here and use those to draw my line, and I'll do the same exact thing I did here. Double check that back. Kill bugs while we're at it. Kill the bugs. Yeah, next thing we know, people will be after us for killing bugs. Draw the line. Again, taking it at a 45-degree angle. Get that out of there. Kind of give it a quick test fit, see how everything is. One of the things, just going to do, I mean, this is just a trial and error thing. If stuff needs to be adjusted and moved, it's just a matter of opening it back up, adjusting it, moving it where it needs to go. Again, like I said, this process here doesn't need to be perfect. What you need to do is just get this part done and get on to building the parts that matter. This has just got to clear. Go ahead and get the channels cut out on these. Okay, those are cut, and they're going to be really close. One of the next steps I do, I have my mark here where my elevator linkage is going to come down. I just take my razor knife and I'm going to cut a nice U shape into it, leaving about, probably from the center line, I want to go out about 3/16 of an inch off to allow the linkage to move freely. And I want to go about 3/4 of an inch forward and back of that, in just a nice half moon shape. Get it gone. That way there's plenty of clearance for the elevator. And I'm just going to do the same for this on this side. You see those line up nice. Clean that part out just a little bit. And I'm going to test fit everything. And you can see here, everything fit first time, closes up nice all the way around. The rear here, looks like the rear I can go down depth-wise about another 1/16 of an inch to get it to close. all the way across the top. It's really close, except for one little spot I was off. Just open that up right there. So, all right, just going to take this down in depth right here at the rear, where I could see it was just a bit low still. Okay, just test fit it again. As it all goes together this time, it goes together and closes up nicely. All the way up front, closes together nicely, obviously, except for the wires, which we'll take care of here. You see, just nice tight fit. Everything's already in. Thing's rock solid already. Once it gets glued, it ain't going anywhere. So, okay, next, what we're going to do, wires, and we're going to take care of the mounting blocks. Way we're going to want to do this, I've got one little issue I've got to deal with. I'll deal with that really quick. I'm going to grab a tube. Something I don't normally have to do, but I need to just go ahead and incorporate this right now. I'm going to go ahead and put in an antenna tube all the way from the wing saddle. I'm going to cut out here for the servo outlet. I'm going to go ahead and put this tube in so I can run the antenna wire out once we go ahead and build this machine to make sure everything's removable for the customer. So I know that when I put the servo in the wing, the opening that I'm going to need is going to resemble something about like that. Is how large of an opening I'm going to need. I prefer to mount the servo behind the spar. That way I've got a shorter arm, has less chance of bending, and it also gives it just stiffer, better performance, less chance of flutter. Okay, once I have this kind of generally outlined, what I do is I'm going to go ahead and plunge down, cut. I'm going to cut this, you see here, I'm going to take it down to about a ½ an inch away from the edge. I want to leave about that much foam on the outside as protection. Again, knife works better if you rock it back and forth down to about a ½ an inch. I'm going to draw this back at the 45-degree angle. And then I'm going to go up one notch and then start it about that ½ inch. I'm going to use my finger as a guide. Try to be as precise as possible, but just get that out of there. We don't want it, don't need it. And we have a basic cutout here. What I then do is I'll take these and set them together and get them pretty well exactly where they're going to be. Then I take my pin and I place a mark. And then if I can, I get my pin on the inside and I'm going to trace that outline just like that, where it's very close to what the other side is, and just duplicate what I did. If you take a little bit more foam or leave a little bit, it's not a big deal. If you need to adjust it once it's all put together, it's easy to do. I'm going to put these together, and you can see the opening now. It's just a nice clean opening that everything's going to go on into. I still have room right here to mount the receiver. I'll have room here to mount the wing mounting block, and room here to mount the wing mounting block for the rear. I'm going to go ahead and just leave these stuck together for a second, lined up, and draw the mounting block on. Okay. What comes in the kit? I'm just going to I put a generic mounting block in that's for every size airplane. May need to take a little bit down and sand it down a little bit, which is what we're going to do here. But I'm going to get it generally in place and get it marked. going to mark the back edge of it, the front end now. I have my line where it's going to be, obviously center is going to be on the center line. I'm just going to kind of give it a quick draw, in this case, of what I'm going to take off on the sander. I'm just going to take off that little bit to get it closer to what's going to be mounted down on the inside. I want to leave a little bit of foam on the outside edge if I can. So I'm going to take some of that off. The rear is just a standard rear. It usually doesn't need any trimming. It's just the one I always use. Again, I know that when I drew this thing on the side here, I was going to leave about 1/8 of an inch off to the back, so I'm just going to trace it up on top, leaving that 1/8 of an inch that I know of. And when I'm not measuring these for being, square right to left. All I'm doing is I'm just looking down the inside of the blind nut, putting it right on the center line as I draw these out. So that way I know it's right down the center of the airplane. Okay. At this point I'm going to take a break for a second, go over to the sander and sand this off. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark the distance and install our push rod for our elevator. I'm going to take the actual horizontal stabilizer, come out and just put a mark right at the back end inside here for the distance I'm going to be for the elevator push, or the elevator linkage coming down. So I'm just going to make a mark, and now I know the exact length that I need to make this push rod. So what I'm going to do is I have the DeBro push rod here. They have these little 1-inch threaded rods. There's a little tool, if you don't have one, they're really nice to have. It's a DeBro tool, and it just has 256 threads on one side, 440 on the other, and you just screw it on and bring it down till it stops, and that gives you something to hold on to when you screw this down into the push rod house. So it's just a matter of taking it, screwing it down in. You're going to want to take it down in there about the distance until it's going to reach and actually bottom out on the threads. That way you get a good bite inside the plastic. One thing I like to do when I get close to the end, just for a little reassurance that it's not going to pull out, I like to take just a drop of thick CA, and I'm going to just touch the metal to the plastic and then continue to screw it down in just a little bit, and that way I've got something there that's going to lock it in place. So I'm really careful at this point not to make sure I touch the CA to the tool, though, because it will lock that down. I've done that once and had to throw everything away. So once you've got it in, the pressure will hold it. Just back it on out, set your tool aside. Go ahead and take your clevis, and you have the little keeper that's going to hold it down in place. Go ahead and slide it on, and go ahead and get it screwed down in place. Slide it on through. And just open this up and get it in. And once that all snaps down in place, I like to use a little pair of pliers and pull that plastic keeper up to get it locked in. And that's good. That's not coming off anytime now. So what I'm going to do now is come back to this side and get it built to the length I want. I'm going to take my other threaded rod and my keeper, or the actual clevis. What I'm going to do is I screw this on till I get it about 5/16 of an inch or so screwed on, and then I'm going to hold this So that way the center pin of the clevis matches up to the line. And then at that point, I'm going to put a little mark right on the push rod itself that I can see. And at that point, I'm going to cut it off. And then what I'm going to do is just bury, again, the same thing as the front. Put the control rod or the threaded rod into the push rod here. Now, another thing I do, because it's a little bit more difficult to hold onto that, I'll hold onto it now with a small pair of pliers. Once it gets close, I'm going to go ahead and drop some thick CA on it. Just a drop right there on the edge. Go ahead and take it in a few more turns. And that's about all it needs. Back the tool off and go ahead and put the clevis on. Oh, don't forget to put a keeper in there. That way you can make sure you lock it down onto the elevator linkage. And once this is screwed down, you can see here that now everything, this is back straight neutral. Everything lines up with that line. We're going to be probably within a half a turn to 1 turn of this to bring it right back into where we want it to be. Everything centered in neutral. This part here is done. I'm going to go now. I'm going to go ahead and, last time we started marking off where we're going to put our mounting blocks for the removable wing. I'm going to go ahead and get these cut out right now. Went over and sanded the block to match the contour of the body. I'm just going to line up the center hole and put the mark and trace this outline. And now go ahead and just use a razor knife and cut this out. I want to bury this, being that this is a bottom mounted wing. It only needs to be mounted flush. It doesn't need to be mounted below the surface of the wing to allow the dihedral to sit firmly up against the wing saddle. So again, holding the knife at a 45-degree angle, I'm going to go down about the 1/4 inch that I know it is. Bring it across. Do the same to the back. Okay, what I do here, being that these are right here at the edge and they're only about 1.25 inches or so down on the rear, 1.5 inches or so on the front, I'm just going to use the razor knife and plunge it down in. At this point I'll just try to make approximately the 1/4 inch cut. If I have to shave a little bit more off as I go, that's fine. I don't want to cut too much. I want the mounting block to be just at level. So get that out. I can see that I drifted off a little bit. All I have to do is just kind of shave it now. And just kind of test fit the block. I can feel here that I'm just over level, and I probably don't have to take the actual hole down anymore. What I'm going to have to do is just compensate for the blind nut on the back. So right here in the center, what I need to do is just take out a little bit to allow for that blind nut to fit in there, and now it sits perfectly flat and flush. Going to do the same thing for the other side. Going to do that on all 4. Okay, that's dead center. Dead on. Right now the pockets for these are cut out, and you see they're going to drop in there and fit nice and flush, front and back. And we're going to be mounting these once the fuselage halves are joined together. That's when these will go in place. But now we're going to go ahead and cut out the area for the receiver and go ahead and slide the tube for the antenna through the back. So on here, what I want to do is get a general depth, so I just have an idea of where it's going to go. We want this thing, put a mark up here, a mark here. And I know that by looking at it from that direction, I know I've got to go down about 3/4 of an inch down. And I'm going to clear everything on the inside. Go ahead and get it traced out. Set my blade for the approximate depth of the receiver there. And I'm just going to go down a little past it. I want to allow for the wires to have a little bit of room at the top of the wing. I do try to make these holes here look fairly neat. That way when the wing comes off, it doesn't look like there's a sloppy, pulled out mess up on top. So the finished product that people are going to see is going to be clean. Take the rest of the pocket out here. Holding the knife at a 45-degree angle again, drawing it across. Once I have the one side cut out, I take my pen. That way I can cut it out to the same depth. Okay, now the receiver's just going to fit down here in this pocket. I can see I got to go a little bit deeper. It's not quite buried. So open it back up, take it down just a little bit more. Now we have our pocket cut for a receiver. This one here is going to have a removable receiver, so the wire is going to go through another antenna tube. Just basically all I'm doing is taking another push rod, and I'm just going to run that out, and it's going to come out underneath the tail on the side of the body. That way it just dangles behind the airplane. I'm not going to show how to do that because I don't normally do it. What I am going to show is just an illustration. What I normally will do, and I'll do it to the outside of the body here. Normally, what I will do is I'll mount the receiver the equivalent of what I'm doing on either the servo or the battery. I like to put my gear inside. I just commit everything to the airplane when I build it. I figure if I want to use build another plane, I'll just buy more gear. So what I'll do is I'll mount it, I'll poke a small hole using just a screwdriver or anything all the way through to the outside of the body, and I'll just feed the antenna wire out. And like I said, I'm just going to give you an illustration. I'll give it to you on this half of the body here. If it were to come out a hole, what I'm going to do is then take the razor knife, and I'm going to make an S cut about 1/8 of an inch down into the foam. I'm just going to do it for a small amount here. And all I do is just bring that, and I'm going to put it in a wavy pattern all the way up the side of the fuse. And well, you can't really see it, but when you bring your fingers by, you'll see where it pulls out. And then what I do with the wire is, once it's come out and I've got it to the point, I'll just find where it begins, and I just take the wire, pull it back, and I just push the wire in with just the tip of my fingernail. And you don't need to glue this at all. When it is time to retire the airplane, and you pull the covering off and you pull your gear out, it'll just pull right back out with it. But I like running it this way because it's clean. I don't have any external showing wires. You know, if there are some emitters or anything, I'm not going to have the opportunity for it just to take the wire off or something and jeopardize my reception. So you could see here, this is just an example of how that wire is going to go into place. Now that we have the wing mounting blocks ready to go in, and the receiver cutout's done, the last thing that we need to do on the inside of the fuse here is mount the switch and get the rest of the wires buried before we can go ahead and close the fuselage up. And so what we're going to do, get the switch in. The way I like to do the switch, and there's a couple ways of doing it, but personally I like to mount the switch on the right front middle of the fuselage, just in front of the wing saddle. I usually throw my airplane off the back, and that way I'm not holding it and going to turn it off when I throw it. Some guys will mount it up on top. You know, it's a matter of personal preference. Wherever you want to put it where you want. A lot of guys like to use the switch jacks, the phono jacks. I've had bad experience with those and have had quite a few customers get back to me about needing new airplanes because they burnt up. These, the high-tech switches, are pretty much bulletproof. So let's go. Here's what I do. I'm going to go pretty much opposite of the servo. So just to get an idea of where I'm at, I want to go about here. I take the switch and just hold it in place, trace around it. And I'm going to make a clean cut with a fresh razor knife on the outside to cut this out. I want just a really clean pocket where this is going to go into. Also, the other thing I like to do is I like to have my charging jack sit underneath it in its own separate slot that can be recessed, pulled in and out. So I'm just going to do a small little square. I don't even bother drawing that out because I'm just going to do it with the knife real quick. But here what I'm going to be doing is just plunging all the way through, and on the opposite side here I'm just going to create a pocket down in this open area. That way I can just shove the wires down in there and they'll be clear of the servo operation. And again, gently remove the foam. And now we have a beautiful hole in which to place our switch. There you go. For the charging jack, I like to go right underneath it, and usually go about 1/4 inch or so. I just go the width of the blade, about 1/8 of an inch, and just kind of knock that out. Pull it out, and I'm going to have a nice little slot there now for the charging jack to go through. Push that all back together. And hog the foam out. Now I can go all the way through and I'll have room for my wire. Where this wire came through is going to be where I'm going to put the pocket of wires underneath here. So that's just going to be that are coming in here. And just removing part of it to allow the wires just to be pulled up in place. I'm going to take the switch. I don't need to worry about the orientation of the wires. I like to have the switch going forward for on, back for off. That's just a personal thing. I do that with all my airplanes, so I know, you know, if I know see the switch is forward, I know the plane's on. You know, do it however you want to do it. What I do is I just test fit it real quick, pushing it up from the back. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it into the hole. until the top of the switch is just below flush. And that way I can still reach in there, but I'm not going to have anything sticking outside of the airframe to look bad. Like I said, I just pushed it in. I see that it's a nice fit. I'm going to take it back out, put a couple drops of hot glue a little farther in, just very small drops. That way as I push it up into place, I'm going to be putting glue all around the outside edge of the switch itself. So just a matter of getting some glue in here, a couple small spots. Once it's there, bringing the switch up into place. Now I got the switch in place. I got a little bit of, what it does is it leaves a nice little bead of glue all around the outside edge. We need to do that. There's plenty of glue all around it. On the back side, I am going to go ahead and put a little bit more. See here, I'm just going to trim up a little bit more of this foam. And go from here. On a regular switch, you have where your batteries comes in. Pretty obvious, it's got the female connection on it. Your charging jack is the one that's on the same size as where your battery lead-in is. Your external power is the one that's going to be on the opposite side of those two. So what I do with this is I'm going to go ahead and just take my charging jack, push it out through the hole, and I like to set this up so that my charging jack is going to come out about an inch, and that's the maximum it's going to come out. I also like to have it on the inside. I'm going to position my wires so that way as I push this back into place, what will happen is it won't want to push all the way in. It'll resist falling in the cavity itself, so I have to cut into the airplane to pull it out, and it'll just hold nice and tight and just kind of stay there right at the edge. I can pull it out with a pair of needle nose pliers. That's all that I'm after, and the way I do that is I take the wire here and I'm going to bend it down into the cavity that I made, pull it to the length that I want out here, so when I go, I've got about that inch is what I'm after. And I take a little bit of hot glue here. I'm going to glue that wire down onto the foam. Hold it down there in place for a second. By gluing it down in this spot, what's going to happen is the twisting of the wire, or the resistance of the wire itself to not want to bend on itself, is going to allow this switch to not push all the way back in. It'll just hold tight as it goes down. The way this is going to be set up here, I'm going to have to make a small little channel in between where the receiver is going to sit and the pocket here. I'm going to get this, have to hold this down a little longer to get it set. But I'm going to make a small little channel, and this way I've got to put a small extension for the power lead from the switch here to go to the receiver, and the servo lead will be plenty long enough to just channel itself out into the hole itself. The battery wire is going to go in this pocket that we've created here once it's plugged in. So see if that glue's set up enough to hold. Yep, looks like it has. So what I'm going to do with this wire here, I'm just going to do the same exact thing I did here, just make a small little V-notch and someplace for that wire to sit. Bring it across and just put a drop of glue, a couple spots. That way the wire will hold in place. It's like watching paint dry. It's a favorite pastime of this guy named Greg. He runs this website named slopeflyer.com. Yeah, he likes to watch paint dry. It's pretty bad. We've talked to him about it, but his therapist said there's really no hope. All right, now that we've went ahead and got a small lead, got that glued in place just like I did the other the lead for the servo. Now this pocket that I made over here, all I'm going to do is just start to bring all the wires together and just get those nice and neat out of the way. And this fuselage is going to be ready to close up, get our mounting blocks on for our wing. We're going to put a little goop on some of these openings right here, and then we're going to close it up, hot glue it back together, and get ready to mount the tail and build the tail. So I'm just going to do this really quick, just test fit everything to make sure nothing's binding. Everything will close up nice, it'll all come together, and everything here is in good shape, good order. Nothing's touching, nothing's hitting. So at this point, here's what I do. Got everything, it's connected, we know it all works because we tested it out earlier. I'm going to take a little bit of goop. I was able to get at my local hardware store some plumber's goop. It pretty much is all the same. Marine goop, regular household goop, it all works. What I'm going to do, because I can't get the nozzle of this hot glue gun in and fill up some of these pockets and cavities quick enough, what I do is I'm going to come back and just put a little goop on the inside channels of the carbon fiber. And what that's going to do is just fill up the inside and maybe here a little bit farther in. Just make it a real solid structure on the inside. Then I'm going to be bringing the hot glue gun all around the outside edges, and it'll be good. Actually, before I forget one thing real quick, on the switch, all I did was put the glue inside the hole when I pushed it in. I like to then, once I get it in, run just another bead of glue around the back side of it, and that'll become fluid and solid, and that's going to want to resist pushing in. That way if you try to turn it on or turn it off too hard, it's not going to want to do that. So here we go. Little goop, I'm going to put it inside where the battery goes. What I'm going to do here is, you don't need to put a whole lot, but I just put a bubble down there, and that's just going to seal it up. Put some in there. Put some across. Making sure I'm going to stay really clear of where that arm's going to go across. And I don't want to have any stuff leak through and then bind up our elevator. Okay, and that's what I do on the goop. Like I said, I'm just trying to fill up some pocket space here. The rest is going to be handled on the outside edges. Okay, now just like I did earlier when I tested it out to see if it would all fit together, get the wires here tucked away nice and neat, and then everything back together. I like to just kind of peek in here, make sure that the wires didn't shift, that they're not going to hit the elevator linkage at all, and they are completely clear. My power wire and my elevator servo lead are sticking out nice. And then you've got a couple landmarks here you can line up, like on this fuse here. You can line up where the canopy line comes in, line up where the tail comes together. Take the hot glue gun. What I do is I just stick the nozzle in. It doesn't hurt the foam. Stick the nozzle in, and I go about 4, 5, 6 inches and lay a nice bead in there, and then squeeze it tight. You got to hold this for a few seconds, and I just hold it here. Once I know it's starting to set up, I just take and I wipe the excess glue off, get rid of it, and we're good. Need another stick. I'll start to work my way down the front. Same thing here. All I'm doing is putting the nozzle in and working it down. 4 or 5 inches, or as much as you're comfortable, you're able to hold and squeeze tight. All right, continued gluing with the hot glue gun all the way around the fuselage, making sure I glued around every single cavity, making it solid all the way around. The only thing that I don't glue and I'll be doing this after everything's all done, is I always leave a section on the tail open. And the reason is so I'm able to reach down in there. Once I have the tail built, connect the elevator linkage, then I'll go ahead and, once that's all connected, bring it back, glue it on up, and then we'll go ahead and mount our tail. So we're ready to go ahead and put our blocks in. All I'm going to do is just set them in to make sure it's all perfect still, and we are good to go. So what I'm going to be doing is, once these are set in place, just holding them down with hot glue. Fill it up with hot glue. Don't be afraid, or goop, either way. Put a very generous amount of adhesive in here. And you want to squish it out. You want to make sure that this thing is solid all the way around. It's going to squish out inside the middle of the blind nut, but hot glue doesn't stick to metal. And so it's going to squish out when it's all done. I'm going to reach in there with my pair of needle nose pliers. It'll pull right out, and then the regular hold down bolt will go in there without any problem. I'm just going to squish it out until it's nice and level. And you can see here, as the amount that came out. Still need to put a little bit more around the edges. I want this to be as solid as possible with no gaps, everything solid. So you let that set for just a second. I don't like to wipe that much of even the cold melt or the low temperature hot glue gun off until it's set up just a bit, because then it is a little warm. And then once it's completely set, we'll take it out of the center. Just rubbed off my fingers here. In the meantime, just double check and make sure this fits and it's right down on center. Again, I'm just looking down the center of the hole to see that I'm center line with the fuse, so I know it's all still square. And again, don't be afraid to put hot glue in there, or goop, whatever you're using. More glue. Ready to set the block down. And just force out all the extra. Hot glue is really hot. Can I cry now? I'm really resisting. It's trying to be tough. Greg told me I couldn't cry. So all I'm doing now is just going to rub the excess off, and we'll be good. And here we go. We have our cavity already done for our aileron and torque rods. Cavity for the removable receiver. Wing mounting plates are in. Servos, everything's sealed up. Our charging jack is out. It'll push in nicely and sit here and stay in. So right now we're going to be ready to go ahead and get the tail built and get it mounted on the fuse. The fuselage is put together. There's two things we have to do before we can mount the tail. First of all, we have to build it. Second of all, we're going to finish off the wing. We'll be mounting the wing to the fuse first, and then setting the tail to the same incidence as the wing. We got our tail pieces. All that's going to be required on the rudder is just sanding. We'll do that all at the same time. Show you how we're going to go ahead and put together the elevator linkage on this. First thing I do, as you can see here, I moved everything off the regular work table. But what I'm going to do here is I work up on a separate piece of wood. This here is, I just sand it periodically to make sure it's clean. And that way I'm not going to put any indentions or mar up the wood at all. So I'm just going to work on that. But the first thing I do here is I'm going to measure and get my center line marked. So here, just do a quick calculation. So I got just under 9. So get my center line marked. I'm just going to double check that. And I was off just about a 32nd of an inch, so there's my mark. Okay, now I'm going to take my elevators, get them set into place so that they're equal on the outside edges. Take a little piece of masking tape, and I'm just going to put those down in place for now. Take my elevator linkage, and I'm just going to set this down so that way the center line where the control horn is going to clip onto it is sitting on the center line mark, and put that so the actual wire is sitting right flush against the rear of the horizontal stab. Once it's in place, I'm going to take this and trace out where my stuff's going to go. I'm going to go over to the drill press and drill a couple holes in here for this to bury down into. So this is where it's going to be now. I've got my marks, so all I'm going to do here is just, I'm going to mark this the right top and the top here. That way I put it all back together as I'm doing it. While I'm already here, I'm going to go ahead and mark for a couple places for my hinging. And I'm just going to go about an inch off of that and an inch off the outside edge here. Just going to need 2 of them. Make a mark 3/4 of an inch wide. Okay, now everything is marked. What I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to sand the 45-degree angle on the elevators now. I'm just going to use, on this I'm going to use 100 grit on another EPP sanding block, just like the wing. Okay, just about there. And we have our dual 45-degree angle put on there now on one, put it on the other. Okay, now that we've got this done, what we're going to do, I'm going to create a flat spot just above where my elevator or linkage is going to go into, and that's for when I drill out the hole. I'm going to have something to go into. Same thing on this. And I'm also, while I'm here, just going to go ahead and put a small flat spot above where I'm going to put the hinging in. Okay. These are ready to be drilled. What I'm going to do here, these have the marks already for the center line and the hinge. I'm going to go ahead and use the centering tool like I did earlier, and just go ahead and mark the center line of this horizontal stabilizer. And as you can see here, got the line marked. I like to take a pin on this. I need to go just a bit farther. No, it's good. Take a pin and I just put a mark in here. That way I could see exactly where I'm going to cut. And at this point I'm going to go over and I'm going to drill out the holes for this to bury down into, just like I did on the ailerons. Same procedure. Right, holes are drilled now. We're going to go ahead and just test fit everything real quick. Make sure it all lines up. That our center line's still in our center. Hinge marks are still where they're supposed to be, and they're right on. So now it's time to hinge. Hinging these is going to be the exact same as doing the aileron, just a matter of plunging on in. Okay, let me clean this one up here. Perfect. With the hinges, I just cut them in half. And I'm going to test fit everything one more time before I start to epoxy it all up. Okay, it's test fit. The only thing that I see what I want to adjust here, you see I don't need as much gap even when this is pulled in tight with this linkage. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead, kind of like I did earlier with the torque rods, I'm going to go ahead and just shave these down just a little bit so they sit in tighter. Allows this wire to be buried in farther, and that's all I need to do. I'm not even going to bother retesting it, just take a little bit off and go ahead and get these epoxied in place just like on the aileron. Okay, now the epoxy's mixed up. I've just got it brushed on to the actual elevator and epoxy down in the hole. I'm going to go ahead and pull it together, both sides. What I want to do at this point, I'm going to make sure I lay it flat on my work surface. Also, what I want to do is take my elevator, and I'm not going to connect it, but I'm going to bring my elevator up and just make sure that when it's sitting here, when these are flat on the table, you can probably see in this one that I've got a perfectly straight line in between the two. That way, as the epoxy sets, these elevators are going to be locked into a perfect position to go right into the horizontal stab. Now that the epoxy's set, I'm going to go ahead and take a square, and on the top here I'm going to go ahead and draw a line right down the top of the horizontal stabilizer, so that way when I go to put the rudder on, I have a perfect reference line to do it. Now, what I like to do at this point also, I like to take the rudder before it's sanded down and set it down onto this position and just make sure that when I'm setting it on the line it looks symmetrical to me, and which it does. So now it's a matter of flipping this over. I have also taken the mark for my center and taken it all the way back over so I can see to line up the hole on my elevator linkage. Same basic thing as what we did on the aileron. The only difference between doing your horizontal stabilizer and elevator as compared to doing the ailerons on the wing is we're not going to leave a 1/16 of an inch gap. We only need to leave a slightly smaller gap. You're not going to be moving your elevator nearly as much as your ailerons. So it's the same thing, just push them on in place. A couple drops on that side. And at this point, we're ready to start sanding. Oh wait, well before I get too far, what I like to do here, we're obviously going to be able to move it up without any problem. Coming down, we've got to put just a little small V-notch in here. So just take your razor knife and right where the brass tube is going to hit, go ahead and just put a nice little V-notch in there, and that's going to allow you to get full movement. So, and again, just like the aileron, you want your elevator to be free and moving very easy. Okay, as we're going to begin to sand these, I like to bring my board here to the edge of the table. That way I have plenty of movement with my sanding block. I'm going to go ahead and just completely true up the edges here. Make sure that everything's just exactly perfect on. And now what you want to do, I'll show you here, you want to be able to take these down and taper them just like on the aileron down to about just under a 1/16 of an inch at the center line. I don't like to do any sanding of an airfoil into the actual horizontal stabilizer due to the fact that it's very difficult to set up the incidence without having another incidence meter on the tail to set it with the wing. All I'm going to do is just put a nice half round all the way around the leading edge of this. So Here we go. And I need to take it down a little farther. This is looking good. What I'm going to do here, I need to flip this over and do this side. So I'm going to bring the edge of this out here just over the edge. I guess I need to do it this way. Doing it left-handed is like a completely new person. Okay, as we're just finishing up these trailing edges here, we want to take these down to just under a 1/16 of an inch final dimension. One thing that helps, the majority of the time I keep telling everybody to sand at a 45-degree angle instead of going lengthwise. On the elevator, it's really good to finish up with the flat part of the sandpaper going lengthwise. That way you take out any type of wave that you might have put in there. You're going to make the elevator nice and flat. Now we're going to go ahead and round the leading edge. And the way I do that is I just take the sandpaper, hold it at a 45-degree angle, and go ahead and put the beginning of a 45-degree bevel on the front, and then just round that over. That's just a real simple thing. As you come around the edge, what I find works really well is just drawing the sandpaper down very easily, not anything rough at all. What will happen with the balsa is you'll begin to tear it if you pull too hard on the end. So just working it nice and gentle across. All right, we should be just about there. Just make sure, I like to just go over it here just to make sure it's really close. And what we're going to have, if you look here, you can be able to see that it tapers down right to a nice point. We've got a nice half round leading edge to our elevator. This is ready now to set aside and do the rudder. For the rudder, what we're going to do, I'm going to be sanding down and tapering the rudder from about the last inch down to a point, about the same general thickness that I did on the elevator itself, and then just putting a half round on the front of the rudder itself. We have the vertical sanded. We're going to go ahead and now get this ready to go ahead and mount right up here on top of the horizontal. Earlier I drew the reference line to be parallel with the trailing edge. What I'm going to do now is just put a couple more lines just a little bit wider than I know the 1/4 inch balsa is. I'm going to do that so that way as I glue the balsa down, it's going to go ahead and I can line it up perfectly square. Okay. All right, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my fuselage and the horizontal stabilizer. I'm going to set it in place where it's supposed to be. All I'm going to do is take the vertical and set it down on here to mark exactly where it's going to mate with the trailing edge. I'm going to put a mark on the side here so that way I know exactly where this needs to touch the back of the horizontal stabilizer. So I have that now. What I'm going to go ahead and do, pull this off to the edge, like so. I'll use anything that's got just a little bit of weight. I go ahead and just put this here. And what this is going to do is just going to hold it in place. Now we've got our lines drawn out. We've got our mark here on the side. exactly where we're going to be setting this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to use thick CA and go ahead and lay down a bead of glue right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the tail on the proper place. And then come over here and use my square to make sure that it's perfectly square. Okay, once we have it pulled where we want it to, go ahead and kick it. Double check it, make sure it's dead on. It's dead on at the moment. Okay, I like to do two layers of glue over the top of what we just did, just to make sure that I get a good bond between the two parts of balsa. So I got the thick CA in there. I pulled it down, made a nice fillet. I kick it, come back with a layer of hot glue, and all I'm going to do is just lay a bead of hot glue down the edge on both sides. So I'm just going to wait a second, let it cool just for a second, and then quickly pull it off and create a nice little quarter round, and the tail is done. It's ready to go on the body. Now that our spackle is dried overnight, it's time to go ahead and get this sanding down. I'm just going to show you on a small area how I go about it, and then I'm going to go ahead and finish off the rest of the wing. I leave the tape on here until I have pretty much the entire wing sanded down, and then I'll just lightly go over that trailing edge to feather the rest of the spackle into it. When you're sanding spackle, spackle comes off very easy. You're not going to put a lot of pressure on. Let the sandpaper do the majority of the work. And what's very important when doing, the top of the airfoil especially, don't sand back and forth with the length of the sanding block. What you're going to do at that point, you're just going to leave a lot of grooves in it. Either sand straight forward, going with the airfoil, or at a 45-degree angle going with the airfoil. I prefer to do the 45-degree angle, and I seem to get doing that, at least I get a much smoother wing surface doing it that way. So, just going to take this edge down right here. Like I said, I'm not doing a lot of pressure. When I'm sanding, I'm also going just up to the tape. I'm not trying to go any further back onto the balsa at all. And I'll show you right here where we want to go. Okay, this edge of the wing here is done. Now I'm just going to bring it to this point, show you right here. This is the what you're going to want. You've got you want to take it down just to the beginning of the sill where you can begin to fill the foam again, but filling in any low spot and imperfection in the wing. And I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest off, and we'll go from there. What we're going to be doing is we're going to go on to the taping aspect and talk to you guys a little bit about the tape. There's a couple different schools of thoughts on tape. There's single strand and bidirectional. My personal preference is single strand with the lightest weight tape you can get. You can probably actually see here it's very small fibers, but you still have an extremely amount of tensile strength in this tape. One of the benefits to having single strand tape as compared to the bidirectional, first of all, is the ability to strip it down into small quarter-inch strips or even smaller, and that's going to allow you to go around bends and curves and not have a wrinkle. Anytime you have a wrinkle in the tape, whether big or small, what's going to allow to happen upon an impact, it's going to pull itself apart, and you're going to lose the tensile strength that you once had. So you need to get these down without a wrinkle, perfectly smooth, and then shrink. And that's the other aspect of the tape. This tape has about a 3 to 5% shrink factor. Once it's put on, we're going to iron it down just like the covering, and you'll actually see it get nice and tight, and it'll just get really smooth at that point. And we'll know from there that it's going to be ready to put covering on at that point. So the first step we're going to do on this, we're going to go ahead and spray this down with Super 77 spray. What I'm going to do here, I just got some paper. I'm just going to lay it out because I don't want to get my work surface completely gummed up. And when you put the Super 77 spray down on the wing, be generous with it to the point of almost bubbling on the wing. What you've done with the spackling is you have created a mechanical bond between the spackle and the cells in the foam. And now what we want to do is just create so much adhesion that the tape, when it's ironed on, will not only pull off, if it has to come off, the spackle, but it'll also pull out cells. And when you combine that with the overall skin tensile strength of the foam as a whole, you're going to have an incredibly strong surface. So go ahead and get this sprayed, and you can see here there actually will be some type of color change. You'll be able to see it darken up as we go. So here we go. There's really no need to spray the actual aileron. When I'm covering with Solartex, it's got self-adhesion, and it'll stick really well just to the wood. Now I can see that I've got a pretty good coat on here. You can also see it's just starting, I don't know if we can get in and see it or not, but it's just to the point where it's got tiny little bubbles on it. And I know that at this point it's got a nice thick layer of glue. It's exactly what I'm after. Flip this around to this side. I can see in the light the reflection of how much is on there. And that's just where I want to be. Now that we've let the Super 77 tack over, we're ready to go ahead and start putting down our tape. What you want to do when you tape a wing, there's a couple options depending on your flying conditions that you want to do. Tape obviously adds weight, but tape adds a tremendous amount of strength. There are two ways that I'll build a wing depending on the conditions. One is I'll either take the tape the full length across the trailing edge. In other words, one length of the wing panel to the next, or I'll stop it in the center and create a joint. Knowing that the conditions this plane is going to be flown in, I'm going to go ahead and stop everything in the center, and we'll just alternate sides. So what I do is just hold the tape up first, get a general idea of how far I'm going to have to cut it so I don't waste too much, and go ahead and take it on off. And this stuff here, when you deal with big pieces, we'll do this. So you just got to be a little cautious on it, a little careful. And here we go. What I do, I'm going to follow the trailing edge of the wing and just work it all the way forward. So holding this piece here just a little bit over the center, using my fingers as a guide on this to keep the tape off. You can touch it very lightly like this, and you won't pull anything off. As soon as you put any pressure on this tape and you get it stuck down onto the foam though, you're going to be pulling cells off along with it. So just holding this finger over here, like I said, to keep it off. I'm going to position this so that way this is right along the trailing edge, and then making sure there's no wrinkles the whole way. I'm just going to continue to lay this down all the way out. Now if I were to try to pull this up, it's just going to pull all of that work off. So when you do it, one time only. Also every time I'm going to cut the tip off, I'm going to leave it about 1 inch over And I'm going to then cut this down into approximate 1/4 inch strips on the majority of the wing. For this first piece, where I'm rolling it over and it's basically flat, I only know I have to put about 1 relief cut in here. And you only need to just put a small little slit in the tape. You see it'll just pull back, separate, and then it's just carefully lay it over onto the other side of the wing. Carefully lay it over onto the other side of the wing. You don't want to put any real pressure on here. You don't want to bend it at all. So this piece is down and on. I'm going to switch back over to this piece here and trim this off from that last piece. Again, all I'm doing is getting a general idea of the length I need to trim it at. Holding this piece so it's approximately the same amount of overlap on the center section as the other side. I'm going to go ahead and put it down so the edge is right on the trailing edge. And then using my finger as a guide over here, holding the tape off, gently lay this down right on the balsa. What you want to do, or I try to lay the tape so I cover up the basswood strip and then come right onto the balsa. I don't want to go over that into my hinge line. That's where the Solartex is going to go. Once you get the feel of it, you'll be able to cut the tape so you're right at that 1 inch mark. Done it a couple of times, so kind of have a small feel for it. Again, just put a small slit, pull the tape back onto itself, gently roll it over, gently roll it over. I like to alternate sides. That way, at least in the center, I create some type of shear web. I don't know, I've never done an actual bursting strength test on it to see if it has a benefit. I just do it because at least I think it does. So, again, holding it over. Here's where, on the wing, we don't want to try to overlap the tape. In other words, try to eliminate as many tape seams as possible. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking these and just butting the ends up next to each other and then allowing that to come over the edge of the wing again. So holding this side up, I position it just so the edges of the tape are touching. I don't want to set this down too much other than one little spot so that way I can pivot the tape before it'll want to wrinkle and allow it to line up all the way down the wing. And then gently tapping it down as I go so it's perfectly butted up against the other piece. And then come back and smoother. And on this piece here, due to the fact that it's got a pretty good bend on it, I'm going to have to strip this down into probably 5 or 6 small pieces and then allow those to bend over so we don't get the wrinkles in tape. And we'll show the other side as a close-up also. That way it'll show the other direction. What you want to do here is just go ahead and put a few small slits in between the fibers, and then once they're there, hold the tape as a unit and just pull it back onto itself till it hits the foam. I pull these back up out of the way and then allow the tape with just a small amount of tension to follow the natural line it wants to bend without a wrinkle. So try this again here on this piece. I've got to hold this up. This is a hard angle to see, but you got to hold that tape out of the way and just allow this to follow the natural angle. And these here are just going to go down pretty easy without any fuss. They're almost straight. And at this point we can get a nice clean edge. We'll duplicate it on the other side. It'll show up better on this side. If you see that there's a little wrinkle, like right there, I was able to pull the tape off itself up till the foam, and then I was able to push that wrinkle out. I'm going to allow it to just naturally go away as it goes the rest of the way out. If you do have small wrinkles in the tape, try to eliminate them, but if they're very small, when we iron the tape down to set it onto the foam, we'll be able to shrink out 99% of them. So if you're careful, you can pretty much do this wrinkle free. Again, put 5 or 6 small relief cuts in the tape. And what we're going to do here, strip it back, pull the tape back, and then as the tape comes down, we're going to allow that tape to naturally follow the line. In this case, the tape's almost coming straight back on the tip. Strip it back. Fold it over, and you can feel that there's no wrinkles in it as it goes over. This wingtip there is done. Next piece. So we're putting on another piece. We want to make sure on the overlap. We want to minimize the overlap of the tape to tape. We want a nice butt joint there. So what we're going to be doing, let's see, don't put it down too hard. Holding our finger there, and then bring it to a nice tight joint. Tap one spot down, and then work it down, tapping it down as you go. Now, as we begin to get to the front of the wing, there's 2 ways of doing this as we're coming up to the front edge of the wing. Keeping these close all the way down. And that's set. You can see it looks, the goal is to make it look like one single continuous strand of tape from the beginning, from the front of the wing all the way to the back end. The only place that we're going to have any overlap of tape at all is right here in the center, at least on this wing. If you're flying in a more extreme condition, you're going to do the same basic thing here. The only difference is you would take this piece of tape, for instance, this piece of tape here, coming across would extend all the way to beyond this trailing edge. And what that would do is create a shear web and then lock this wing panel in even further. And I would recommend doing that if you fly in heavier wind conditions where the weight is not an issue. So bring this around to show how I'm going to trim up the leading edge. Where we've got this piece extending over the front of the wing, what we're going to do, we want to trim this off and just roll it over gently onto the top of the wing. I've got some surgical scissors that I was able to buy at a hardware store, and I'm going to come in here and trim this off. These work really well. I trim the tape just a little bit at a time. What you want to try to do is minimize any type of how do you say it on the tape where it'll begin to splinter up on itself. You want to just eliminate it. You want it as nice a clean joint as you can get and a cut. At this point, pretty much everything that we're doing will begin to show on the wing as we cover it any imperfection we're going to have to try to work out. Every step you do from this point on should make it look better and better all the way around. Okay, now I've got that trimmed off. Get the tape over. And I want to take this and just very gently, my finger here, I begin to roll this piece of tape over to get it stuck onto the leading edge nice and clean. Once it's down and at a 90-degree angle, I'll roll it over the rest of the way. Coming out here to the end, I can see that if I turn this way, if I were to begin to roll this over, I'm going to have a wrinkle right here at the end. So I'm going to strip this down, probably 2 pieces right here at the end before I set it, and roll those over. And then I'll be able to have that completely go across the leading edge without any wrinkle at all. And then the third piece here just goes over nice and clean without a wrinkle. And basically what we've done is we've come through and set this the rest of the way down. We now have a wingtip completely taped and covered and no wrinkles. There's a few relief cuts. When we iron them down, they'll get nice and tight. And when we cover this thing, we'll be able to cover it pretty much with a Solartex with no relief cuts at all, rolling it over 100% from side to side. I'm going to continue taping this wing the rest of the way out, and then we'll show you how we iron it down. After we're done taping the bottom, we're going to go ahead and flip over and do the top the exact same way. The wing's now taped, top and bottom. It's time to iron it down and get it set. When I do this, I like to use the 21st Century iron. The reason I like to do it is it has the dial temperature indicator. I know that when I'm setting the tape, it's going to be a different temperature than when I'm actually applying the Solartex. Any iron will work. You just need to make sure that you can check the temperature. I know that they have little things you can put on it and it'll tell you what it is. The important part about doing tape, you've got well, how do we say, a variance in temperature that we can use probably between about 205 and 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And that will allow the tape to shrink without destroying itself. What will happen if you go too hot, you're actually going to take on the tape, you won't burn up the fiberglass fibers. You'll burn the tape that's in between, and it'll pretty much melt away, and you'll just end up with this fuzzball looking wing, which at that point you've got to try to pull off and clean off and then retape. So what you're going to see, we're going to do a couple different angled shots on this to show the actual shrinking of it. You want to keep the iron moving though. You don't want to let it sit for too long, and you want to go ahead and iron the entire thing down. If it sits for too long, it's going to burn it. You just want to keep it moving.
What temp do you have it at?
Right now I've got it at 210. From this other, I'm going to do the inside here, and then we'll show on the other camera angle what's going to happen at the tip. And when you're doing this, what this really does is it's two things. It's shrinking the tape down to get it nice and tight. And the second thing it's doing is it is setting it to that spackle and foam, and it will not come off without destroying what's underneath now. It's on. It's really good to do it this way. You can up here?
Yep.
Okay. Here we go. You want to make sure you roll it over and seal every spot. You will really be able to see where and where you haven't been. It'll get really smooth and shiny where you've been,